My guest today has been with Microsoft for almost 14 years in Ireland and the US, and has had roles such as Senior Premier Field Engineer, Principal Program Manager, and now a Principal Software Engineer. Make sure you stick around to hear John's advice on how to get into Microsoft, or how he got into Microsoft more appropriately. John McCabe, welcome to Sympathise, mate.
Thanks, George. Good to see you again.
Yeah, very good to see you, mate. For those watching the show, John and I have known each other for quite a long time. We never quite got to present together, did we? Though we did a lot of things online and did. Oh no, that's not true. You came to Australia. We'll
I
get
did
into
come to
that at some point.
Australia.
You came
Yeah,
to Australia.
it was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. So let's kick off with what I pretty much ask everybody. What did you actually want to do when you were a kid? What was the first thing you thought about in your career?
Robotics, without a doubt. I wanted to build robots, and not even. Do you know the show where the robots bash each other? It wasn't even they.
Yeah.
That wasn't even around. I just wanted to build kind of cool robots, and so from when I was like microscopic size, like always these little toy, cheap robots that you'd buy from any type of store that you just see bashing around, and you'd take them apart and you'd look at the electronics, and that's where like all my kind of obsessions with technology started, was just how do robots work, completely. And still don't do robotics today, still do something totally different, but I have plenty of robots that are scattered around my office that I wish I had time to get.
So did that lead you to any sort of work or to what you ended up studying?
So this is probably the dullest part of my life, in the sense of I made some really poor studious decisions when I was in what would be the equivalent of high school for kind of the US, and secondary school for the European community. I didn't study. And so when I eventually got my college place, and I did get into college, I didn't get the course I was expecting to. And it was kind of it was a blessing in disguise, if you want. Like, I couldn't move away from home. I couldn't afford to fund it myself at the time. It was kind of like, this was 1996, so it's like it just wasn't going to happen. So I ended up getting into the local college doing electronic engineering, and strangely enough, that kind of led me on a weird path of really getting connected to kind of digital systems and understanding microprocessors, and all the different things that would go on throughout the years, like telephony, and how kind of telephony switches would work, and frequency modulation for all these different analog electronic programs, and building amplifiers for guitars, just all sorts of weird, strange stuff that just became a foundation of everything that I actually love doing today. So it was like that, a blessing in disguise. Still is a blessing in disguise, because it still crops up every now and again that you're just like, hey, I know for your analysis, and strange things like this that you would not think through, like the career that I've kind of had in Microsoft so far, or even the career that I had before Microsoft, would actually be fundamental pieces of it.
Yeah. It explains why you. I remember when I first mentioned you were like the link server guy and telephony. So that explains a little bit about that. But take me into, how did you actually get your first? It looks like you went to DB Computers first off, if that was the first one that's listed on LinkedIn anyway.
Oh
How
yeah.
did you sort of get into? Was that out of uni? Was it a job on the side that you got?
Well, so ironically enough, there was a job that was before that actually was work. It was kind of a really crazy job. It was one of these jobs that, again, it was the kind of the whole switch over to IT. Like, I was in electronic engineering, I was doing really great stuff. My course at the time was taking a shift into analog electronics, and really deep embedded analog electronics, and I had no interest in that. I wanted to do digital systems, microprocessor architecture, even, all that type of stuff. That's where I
Mm.
wanted to be in my life. But it just, the course I was doing just wasn't going that direction. So I got a job for, believe it or not, an entertainment complex that was starting up an IT center. And so they seen money in IT, but they also had a bookies, like a gambling shop, where they wanted to be one of the first online gambling retailers in Ireland. So they bought themselves like a 64K lease line, set up servers, and basically asked us to run one of the first online gambling shops in Ireland. And it was just incredible transformations of going from, like, I knew IT, it was all self-learned. I knew how to fix computers. I had done kind of summer jobs building computers for a company, did thousands of computers for universities. over that summer. But then this one came along and it was real like, this is very different. Now I got to fly to the US to a gambling company in Florida. First time in the US. It was like, oh my God, you know, you're in the with these big executives, realizing there's like 26 types of cheeses, you know, like when you go for lunch that these burgers, like very strange that you very strange for a kid from Ireland where like we had, you know, the cheese came from the cow across the road and that was it, you know, that's all you're getting. And now you're in this global environment looking at online gambling and trying to set up like everything from security. So you had to become a jack of all trades and learn really quickly, which was kind of like the real eye-opener moment in my opinion, because it realized that the more broad and base knowledge that you actually have, then the easier it becomes later on in your career, and the easier it becomes when you start tackling problems, because you can just start slicing things off, because you can understand the dimensions of networking, you can understand the dimensions of security, internet routing, all these different things that kind of make up systems. You can actually kind of go, okay, I know how this, I know the basics of all of it and how it kind of pieces together. And from that led me into the company that assisted us in building all this was DB Computers, which led on to a job, and they were bought over by a company called Blue Chip CSS, which we did a whole bunch of work for them, from building ISPs to like working with international reinsurers, building multi-point VPNs for these global reinsurance companies. Just insane stuff, and working like, you know, being kind of a lot of the pioneers of like even Hyper-V in Ireland at the time. Like we were one of the first companies to actually put in a lot of Hyper-V towards the 2008, and that was a transition between CSS to a company called CDSoft, which is actually where most of the weird magic kind of started to happen, because I started transferring into voice. We had done all the virtualization space, we had built it, we had done all the security gateway stuff. If you remember, was it a unified access gateway from, I think it was called, it was a cool product that was the proponent to kind of direct access and things like this before Microsoft, or before it all kind of reshaped again back to VPNs as we are now. But that was kind of the proponent to all of this type of stuff. So it just gave me this mad broad knowledge, and I've had really good supportive bosses in all those three different companies, because they just were like, okay, how can we keep you employed, and what do you want to go do? And it was quite literally, I was like, you know, you'd wake up in the morning and kind of go, I want to build an ISP. And so he said, if you can figure out a reason and a company to build an ISP for, you can go build an ISP. And it was that type of, oh crap, I had no idea how to build an ISP. So off we went, and we figured out how to build an ISP. And it was like very successful. Like a lot of it was just very, very successful. And, you know, as you know, you learn a crap ton through all these kind of, you break a lot of stuff, you fix a lot of stuff. That type of knowledge just kind of stays with you after a while, especially like I even remember like, you know, doing a firmware upgrade on a SAN for a pharma company, and we wiped the entire controller by accident. But we learned very quickly how SANs work, and how like they did, like, you know, the boot records and all the kind of partition logic is still actually stored throughout the SAN. So if you knew how to figure out how to manipulate the controllers, you could actually extract it all and rebuild the controller from that. Very heart-wrenching 10 hours and multi hundreds of millions of euros worth of kind of pharmaceutical data that you had to get back. Knowing that they didn't have a backup for the last 30 days really helped focus your mind. So it was one of those type of things where you're just like, okay, right, we got this. And then that kind of transition, and in that CDSoft thing, I think what was really interesting was that, and I want to be clear, because like a lot of people kind of their life goal is to work for Microsoft. I hadn't really thought about that. You know, it was kind of so weird. I hadn't really thought about that. I was really happy getting all these kind of crazy projects and people giving me strange money to go off and do really weird things. And I was like, I love this. I love the life of a consultant.
Mm.
And then I started getting into, the boss at the time kind of gave me the challenge of like, here, go fix OCS server. And I had never seen this thing before, but I had a knack of just being able to pick up a problem and kind of, you know, taking it apart. Same as yourself, like as we've done many times, you just kind of start distilling it into its components. So I found, I worked out this, whatever problem was going on with the edge servers and the kind of the OCS internal servers and being able to allow for remote call connectivity. I figured it out over about a day and a half, and my boss at the time was like, I don't believe it. And I was like, go try it. Like I said, I don't believe I fixed it either, because like I've never seen this thing before. But yeah, there it is. Like if this is the test you told me to do, this isn't working. And that kind of introduced me into the whole world of OCS. But it was the pinnacle. or was the not the pinnacle, but it was the kind of lynch point because it opened up my eyes. It was like not a lot of people were doing it, and I heard about all these different programs because the CD Soft in particular, which was the company, having had a really great Microsoft partner relationship, like phenomenal. The Microsoft. The partner technical advisors and the partner technical specialists and the account managers who were in and out of the business all day long. And I was like, I didn't think this could happen because every other company, you had to churn through a ton of revenue to get these people to even look at you. Like, whether it was HP or whether it was Dell, they didn't want to know you if unless you were like selling like 200 grand's worth of kit. And so this was really interesting that we had people from Microsoft coming in, and I was just like, and so we were showing them what we were doing, and they were getting, holy God, no one, like no one else is in the country at the time is really doing stuff that we're doing. And I was like, well, so he said, you know what you should do? And he said, you should become an MVP. And like, it's not like you can just flip a switch and become an MVP and like show your muscles and go, oh, I'm an MVP. Yeah, obviously the program is you have to kind of earn it through the community. So that led into like speaking, it led into content creation, it led into all these different things. And it was a kind of a fascinating thing of like, being able to kind of retrospectively go back and really, really distill into parts that like odd parts that it's so strange because even today there's people that still look at the very old blog that I have and post comments
Really?
of things that I did.
That's
And like, and so you're just sitting there kind of go, isn't that information outdated? And like, that's the one thing that you don't kind of realize as you go throughout your career. Just because you're moving on to the next greatest technology, it doesn't mean that the whole world has shifted. The whole like this whole thing of like, oh, the next big thing is AI. Well, hang on a second. There's still people out there that still has SBS servers installed somewhere on premise, and those guys are never moving. And so it's kind of that whole like thing. But anyway, I eventually earned my MVP, and as I got my MVP and I enjoyed it, and I was it was a great honor to receive. Becoming a Microsoft employee became also real. I was one of the few people creating System Center content. I'd moved from Link and OCS to over to System Center, and we were doing really fancy stuff with inside System Center. And there wasn't a huge amount of people in Ireland doing System Center well. There was a few really good players doing System Center, don't get me wrong. But we had started kind of really transitioning to it. And so in Microsoft Ireland at the time, they, and this was, by the way, this was in the middle, at the very start of the recession, just as it was starting getting really like the 2008, around 2010, it was really getting bad. Like, the companies were closing, people were starting to take pay cuts, and I was leaving. I got a job offer from them as a contractor. And the rules of contracting in Microsoft is that your job is not safe from day to day. It hopefully is. And, the idea is that you transition from a contractor to an FTE is ruled as quick as possible. But in the middle of a recession with a very young family and a brand new house and all these mad bills and losing a company car, I made the intelligent decision now, the retrospectively intelligent decision to go work for Microsoft, and the journey begins.
So how did that actually come up for you? How did you actually get that job? Did someone approach you, or did you see the job come up?
No. So like as I said, these Microsoft staff, and I like credit to them. Like I will say like credit to them. They saw what we were doing, and specifically they saw what I was capable of doing. Probably believed in me more than I did, which was fascinating because you don't you don't really think about it. You're just like, well, why do these people want to talk to me so much, And it's like this is kind of cool. And they saw what we were doing, and they said, "Can you come? If we can open up a role, can you come and teach the partner community in Ireland how to do this properly? Because we need to." It was a revenue generating thing, and I obviously didn't understand that at the time, but they were asking me to come and basically build a partner training lab. Microsoft Education at the time wasn't the way it is now, like, or even the last 10 years. It was just very different. It was just, it's evolved into a great picture. But so we had to go and skimp and scurry and raid CSS banks of information that we could get access to as vendors to try and build this thing. But they came and asked me, and they fought to build this role for me, which was like, it was a great privilege. I was exceptionally honored and humbled. that they asked would I interview for this contractor role. Now, again, it was one of those type of things where, oh, Janie, contractor or FT, you just couldn't, outside of the blueprint of the way Microsoft does its stuff, you just couldn't get a role unless it was a contractor. And so they just said, please come do this. And like this, that it just transformed into, it just snowballed. Like I was in there 9 months as a contractor, 9, 10 months as a contractor, and then the FTE position as a premier field engineer came in. And because I had been doing all the work with the community, because I had like a background in everything from Active Directory to Exchange to Link to all the System Center products, the premier field engineering role, especially in Ireland, that we, if you remember, like the premier field engineer was usually silo aligned to a specific set of technologies. Like in Ireland, we always had to be more generalist. So coming from that type of background, the premier field engineering role was just like, oh yeah, you, like, they were like, you're that guy that does all this. Yeah, yeah, you're a great fit for this role. And so I was very lucky to be able to get that FT role, and thankfully only spend 9 months as a contractor and not get into any of the politics. But you know yourself, like once you kind of get that security as an FT role, you're like, okay, cool. Now what crazy stuff can I get up to?
And there's plenty of
That's
that.
And we did a lot of crazy stuff. So
Yeah. No, that actually explains a lot of I guess, the initial side of things. And what I'll talk about for anyone watching this is that one of the first things I learned about from you was that the way you educated yourself was preparing presentations and presenting at Tech Eds and Ignite, and and the immense amount of tech readies and internal Microsoft event that used to occur. Still does now. Actually, it's a different name. And John would always, and you would always do sessions there. And I think I even re-delivered one of your sessions in Australia that you and Anders, good old Anders, there's a name I haven't heard of in a while. Funny for the people you suddenly think about. But I remember thinking that there was just a very different. I'd never heard of anyone who'd sort of thought like that. And then I thought, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, because when I think I'd done one presentation at a tech ed in the Gold Coast in Australia with one of my best mates, Maddie. And it was one of the most stressful things I've ever done, but I learnt so much. So take me. So was that just you did it when you were trying to become an MVP and then realized, oh, hold on, I learned a lot doing this outside of just the general troubleshooting that you do day to day, or was it just something that was just an extension of what you did?
I've always been a tinkerer, like I get, like I said, whether it's OCD, whether it's ADHD, whatever you want to call, like, or artist somewhere on the spectrum. I don't really know, but like like there's always been this weird of like, if I don't understand it, I'll sit down and I'll focus and I'll just lose hours to a problem. And even to this day, and a lot of it is that, you know some of it was driven from, I not to be arrogant about it, but I always wanted to be the best in the room, you know? And so some of it was just, there was definitely a degree of it that was focused around, I want to be the best in the room. How do you be the best in the room? Like, how do you be the best? Like, how do you actually be the person that you walk into a room and you don't necessarily are, it's not the loudest voice. I don't want to kind of over conflate it with, so, sort of being that presence that you kind of go, I am here and everyone must listen to the word of John. No, that's not it. It's, I am here. What do you need to know? And I found that in order to answer that question, you kind of have to go on that journey of, you just have to do things all the time, and start like assimilating kind of that kind of collective knowledge of, hey, well, why does it work this way? Why does it, like, for example, with OCS server, like it still sits on top of Windows, it still sits on top of networking, it still sits on top of physical switches. And so being able to know all that and understand all the kind of components, all that kind of helped you approach like all the voice telephony side of it and how the protocols worked. And so you could then spend some time on doing those things. And like this is that your work, the great thing about working as a consultant was you would always be asked all these questions of like, what is possible, you know, like you'd go into a company and you're like, I have 100 bucks and I can only spend 100 bucks. So what can I get for my 100 bucks? And you kind of go, well, we can really do this. And you start, you can do this, this, or this, and we become creative about the problem. And then you look at it like, okay, well, what do you have? What's the estate? And you start kind of building up that kind of capability of creativity in your architecture, your system design, whatever the case may be. But what that kind of transpired to ultimately was that when I was going for the MVP, like, it wasn't about the simple, it wasn't about kind of, it was about the key thing about the MVP I found was about, like, you'll go to many MVP sites just as an example, and you will see that they kind of reiterate the same content across all the different MVP professionals. That's not to say that that's not valuable. What it is that they are translating it into their communication style, and it's these cool, nice messages in a way that their audience can understand. And I think that was the kind of key thing. It was that I didn't know how to speak that language, and the only way I can speak simply about a problem, it's that whole, if you can't explain it like a 3-year old, you know, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't know it well enough. And so that's kind of reiterated in my mind constantly of like, and again, like, as we go through an entire career, you keep looking back of it and it keeps going to the same thing of like, when I've struggled not being the expert in the room, is because I just didn't know what I was doing well enough. And so I go back and I kind of go, okay, what does this actually mean? And you go and you educate yourself. In some terms, that meant creating content. In some terms, it just meant, give me a problem, give me a creative problem. Someone give me a creative problem, and I'll go off and I'll solve it. And that's it. You'd solve it, you piece it together, and you kind of go, okay. And then you'd record a video for yourself just to show that, can you explain it in your video in simplistic terms? And I've often found, believe it or not, just showing it to my skip levels in a lot of cases, not for kind of notoriety, say, hey, I'm there working on something great, but they don't have the time to often go to the depth that we would have on the problem, but they do have the time to understand the general concept you're trying to kind of transmit. And so if they can't understand your video and they come back with strange questions, then you go back to your drawing board and you keep on kind of going again. And so it was all these different things that kind of led into feeding into the MVP, which was fed into into the content creation, which fed into and as we kind of go forward and forward and forward, I realized the more, as you kind of said at the start, the more and more we do, the more and more I understand it, and the more and more I get it. And then when we talk to people in the audience after, which I always found was the best piece, was that when the questions started coming in, you were like, oh, I didn't think of it that way, that dimension, or that, that kind of like that particular edge case and that particular different things. And it's just one of those type of things that then starts to give you this insane broad body of knowledge that you're just like, some of it's absolutely useless. I'll only use it once every 10 years, but there's most of it shapes up this reality that we live in on a day-to-day basis, that you need to understand that the world is just bigger than what your viewpoint is.
Take me through looking at throughout your career. You started your career in Ireland. You then moved to the United States, and then you moved back to Ireland now. So take me through both moves. What was the desire to move to the US in the first place, and then what then led you to come back to Ireland, back home?
Yeah. So I always wanted to work in the US. Let me just put it out there. It was a childhood dream, watching all the 80s movies and 80s sitcom stuff. You were just like, I want to go live in America. And specifically, I always wanted to live and work in Silicon Valley, because I was like, I was even commenting this morning to my daughter for a strange reason, totally unrelated, but we were just talking about, getting our dreams and things like this. And I was like, she was asking me, would we move back to the US? And I was like, no, well, I would. Absolutely. I totally enjoyed my time, but I already completed my dream, like, because it was like a James Bond thing. I got to live in Silicon Valley, and I got to see San Francisco, and I got to do all these kind of cool things. And it opened up a world of like insanity for us. But the actual motivation was it was just a question of timing, is in, everything, all the balls fell in the right place. I had a particularly low point in my PFE career, retrospectively, it was partly my fault, and retrospectively, I could have done things to address it. But it was probably again, that silver lining moment of like really coming to the realization that if I really, really, truly want an international career, and I really, really, truly want an understanding of what the hell is going on in the world in terms of IT, at some point Ireland is just too small. We don't have that many multinational well, sorry, we have plenty of multinational companies, but you are still limited and governed by, entities outside of Ireland. So like they have
Mm,
US conglomerates that they will manage it. And so I said, I need to do it. I said, if I need to really be successful in my Microsoft career and be able to sustain like um, a life, or even just kind of have potential other opportunities that will help me escalate, like get to the point I want to in my head where I think I should be, then I need to make this transition. And so a lot of things happened like within inside of 28 days from August 15th to like the September 15th. And those 28-day periods of 2015, the decision, like just a certain amount of stuff happened between me and my wife, and the stars just suddenly aligned. Like it was an absolute no up until that point, not from me, but
mm,
from my family. Just was. And in those 28 days, our life like literally flipped,
mm,
and it was just like okay. And you know as like Erin was who I interviewed, Erin Jacobson in the US, like I interviewed with her, and I got the job, and like it was literally okay, cool, when can you come? And so it was like that. It was just, it was a brilliant transition, but I felt it was a stepping stone to something greater. Because
mm,
and what I kind of realized in March of the same year of 2015, I went over and did a summit, an education summit in the US, as part of PFE. Because if you remember, in PFE, we had all these education stuff that we could do as like aside our standard kind of job of delivery and training and fixing things and stuff and helping CSS and so on and so forth. I was over at like an education somewhere where we were kind of trying to define the principles of how we were going to deliver worldwide learning with inside PFE. And it was just an eye opener moment of seeing all the people around the table, um, working away and coming up with these kind of collective decisions and trying to get the best for each kind of community. Like the US required some stuff, the European required it, the Asia Pac required something totally different, and trying to get it all aligned. It was just an incredible experience. And that kind of really solidified in my mind, okay, this is something I like. This, that was kind of like, I really want to do this. And say stars aligned in September. So we got it, we got the visa and we moved over. And like we specifically, it's kind of strange because most people will move to Redmond, or kind of like, one of the big centers, Redmond, now in Reston, or Atlanta is another big center. Silicon Valley is not really something that they really choose. It's not a, hey, we'll go to Silicon Valley. But I had a friend there who worked for Microsoft, and he offered to put me up for a month, which was very kind of him and his wife. And so we decided to move there, and it was kind of remarkable because it was just such a big thing. I was going from working, like, the biggest customers in Ireland, the money they would have spent was probably €1 million a year maximum, like, which is a, don't get me wrong, it's a serious chunk of change. But when you go to customers in Silicon Valley and you're talking about 50, 60, 70, 100 million a year that they're spending with Microsoft, you're like, yeah, no, like overnight, the change was just like, oh, hey, you're going to work for Cisco now, and hey, you're going to work for Tesla, and hey, can you go into HP's headquarters? And you're just sitting there kind of going, what the hell is going on? I went from doing all these small, relatively small customers to these big, globally impactful customers, working on, every single problem that they could. Because again, you came with a generic skill set, so you could, yeah, it doesn't matter what the engagement is. Let me go do it. And you go and you fly around the US, and you again see this other dimension of, and I think this was really interesting piece, is that scale is intimidating, but it only matters when you realize 90% of your problems will happen no matter what scale you're at, like whether it's 10 users, 50 users, 1,000 users. But when you get into the multiple hundreds of thousand users, you get into this weird kind of, let's say, 10% of problems that you will only see at that type of scale. And there's only, how many environments have 450,000 users in the world? Not that many, There's a few, but there's not that many. And it's,
not that
you
many.
know, yeah. And so when you start working with these customers and you kind of realize, hang on, these are the weirdest of problems. So you really need to know your technology stack. You really need
Mm,
to know. And so again, it goes back to the whole learning thing of that when you're actually writing content, because we still create content for for, for all the different communities, you have to know your stuff. And so you spend your time pulling it apart, connecting connecting with the support folk, connecting, and this is, I think, the really interesting piece that when I went to the US was we started connecting with engineering in a much
Mm.
more in like the intent was far more like so because Azure was still being relatively foreign, like it was had a little bit there, but it wasn't to the massive beast it is now. We had contacts with inside Windows Engineer and OCI, like all these different things. And it became more reality because you could fly to them. And I was up
Mm.
in Redmond every other week, so I could fly to Redmond and go sit down and knock on their doors and go, "Hey, you haven't been answering my text messages, so here I am. Tell me what I need to know what this thing does." Because we at the time you couldn't get access to source code either, so you couldn't go read it yourself and actually figure out how the actual thing was built. And I did like all these kind of things led into again kind of that generation of a bigger picture to be able to be able to create better content, to be able to transmit the message so that the teams you start working on or the customers you interact, you can give that type of better experience.
That obviously led to some of the program manager roles that you got for a number of years in the US. I'm assuming, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, no,
From
no,
that,
absolutely,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And then, so was it purely it's time to come back home after a period of time because you had an opportunity to go back to Ireland after that? Had you achieved everything that you thought you'd wanted to do in the US?
Well, it's kind of strange. The program manager roles were with Azure Cat, and it
Mm.
was a team I greatly admired and had an incredible amount of education, fun, learning, connections, and real reality driven scenarios. And it really brought me into the kind of whole software engineering process. And I say it that way because, like, you can deliver infrastructure and it's in a particular way. You deliver software, it's in a completely different other way. There's a lot of similarities, don't get me wrong, there is, but the mindsets, the approach, and everything, and it kind of reshaped an entire mindset of how I kind of approached different problems. And so when we had started kind of doing all that, like when you were working with these big ass customers, and then you had to go back and work with core engineering in Azure in particular for a lot of it, you kind of realize crap, there's a ton of stuff I don't know. And there's a ton of stuff that like I still need to spend some time figuring out. It kind of leads into the answering one part of your question was no, I didn't have all that I wanted sorted because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so when we were looking at coming back home, we kind of had to make a really difficult decision because I knew moving back to Ireland wasn't going to be a career progression thing as such. If I moved back and worked inside in Microsoft, like in Ireland, not because like there's not incredible teams and not because, but because you just don't see the same type of scale. You're going to be working on an internal software engineering team. You might be a sub team to a core feature or something like that. That's all fine. That's all brilliant. But we had been working with global customers. We had flown around the world several hundred times, dealing with all sorts of really complex problems and really complex kind of conversations with executives and middle of the night escalations, like set like working on contracts like Jedi landing Jedi contract at 10 billion one day. We had done all of this stuff, so going back home to Ireland to work on just a simple software feature just didn't
Mm.
seem appealing to me. So we spent a lot of time, spent about a year orchestrating the move back home, but also orchestrating my job so that I could be positioned that I could do all of this cool stuff from the comfort of my office back home. And so, we made the decision way before we moved home, but we made the decision on the fact that it was just the best thing for our family. And like, that's ridiculously important because without family, you know, um,
Mm.
life's just not as fun as it could be. But we were very purposeful about our move. And so, as I say, we spent about a year and a half kind of orchestrating work so that we could prove that, and don't get me wrong, COVID helped a lot in this case as well, because obviously COVID kicked off and we were like, okay, well, we can do our job from our office. So, how can we do it more creatively? And it was during all those times where we kind of really positioned up that this program at the time was the program manager job that it was possible to do and execute well and still be successful from a career perspective in Microsoft as long as I stayed aligned to the programs that I was working on and
Mm.
tried to kind of continue build networks that way, into the different teams that if I did need a role shift for whatever reason, that I could still work on what I consider high impact work and meeting kind of my own personal goals as such. And then we transitioned back home and the world has significantly changed in the last 4 years. And so the projects we've got involved in, the teams we got involved in, like incredible stuff from working on, still hard to believe we're working on game simulation for military planning to space satellites to building kind of transformation projects in satellite industry where you're virtualizing kind of satellite modems and building kind of hyperscale hypervisors for them so that you could actually get around a lot of the legacy kind of nuances of the satellite industry to now working on sovereign engineering and helping kind of stand up kind of sovereign clouds and building software for those things. I can say that like I'm still meeting everything and meeting things I didn't even know I needed to meet or wanted to meet because you're just doing really weird and impactful problems.
Yeah. Well, it's cool, mate. Cool to hear, man. And it doesn't surprise me with you at all. Like it's definitely something that speaks to the person that you are, someone who looks for tough problems and can find solutions to them. So take me through. I always ask everyone this. I have career values that I've followed. It's sort of my guiding lights. I call them. I have to have passion in what I'm doing. I need some sort of purpose in what I'm doing, and I love helping people. So passion, purpose, and helping sort of guides me to where I want to go. Have you got specific values that you follow?
I would still say like they still like I always want to be humble in everything I do. So like it's like I everything I try to choose to do, I try to be I won't say the most humblest person in the room because that's not very humble in its in its own sense. But you know, I never want to see anyone left behind.
Mm.
It's a huge fundamental part of um like as you said, like helping people is fundamentally important. And I would rather spend more time kind of promoting other people because I personally get more out of it. It's not a career value. Like it's not a like oh you write it down in your kind of your connect or whatever your responses for your promotions and things like that. It's nothing to do with that. It's that I genuinely get a buzz about watching people kind of grow and understand, and then as they approach more problems, they stop asking for help as much, but the complexity of what they can challenge themselves with is greatly improves. And so that's the type of thing. The other thing I stopped being afraid to say no, and it's been fundamentally eye-opening. And I say that because when I was first started in Microsoft I said yes to everything and I worked uh shed ton of hours and I really enjoyed it and I do not regret it whatsoever. But as I've kind of gotten more kind of throughout my career and gotten more senior, I found you can be more and I try to teach this a lot of times. I try to teach it like this is a kind of a fundamental part of if you want to be successful in your career, just learn to say no. And it's sometimes the no, like while you feel crap, I should have might have led to something. It usually means that you can focus on what you're trying to do far better. And like this is it's not that you're not capable of multitasking. It's not not that you're not capable of dealing with 10 problems at once. It's nothing to do with that. It's that it's what is the quality of what you're trying to deliver. And so by saying no and using that as a fundamental value of sort of saying having the ability and standing over that you will say no and not actually conflate your time with just crap. You can make sure that what you do and your personal brand and your personal stamp on everything has quality and attributable value to whoever consumes it. And so that can be software, it can be content, it can be books. No, it wasn't because I was doing too much. And so like I use the value of saying no far more now because it has actually helped shape help me look at problems more, help me kind of focus on when I need to focus on specific things. And don't get me wrong, I still take on a lot of work, but I say no to a shed ton more so that what I do take on is of sufficient quality and value to whoever's going to consume it.
That's actually good advice in general for anyone listening. Quite frankly, I think I've done similar the last couple of years where I'm much more selective about what I say yes to and what I'm going to commit to. I'm okay to say to people, yeah, that's something I can do, but it's not going to happen in the next period of time. It's not a priority right now. Give me your highlight and your low light of your career, and then we'll just get you to tell people what you think. Give you a bit of advice for others who are in a similar situation to you growing up in Ireland.
Oh, the highlight was most definitely working on a $10 billion contract. I really don't think I can top that one. That one's going to be tough to top. And being part of this incredible, we were flown into a room. We had 24 hours to deliver a demo. It was incredibly stressful, and it's where knowledge became really important of how the Azure platform worked, because we were like, you think it's just going to work, and you're going to go, no, it just didn't work in the way it was we thought it was going to. And from that, actually, it wasn't just the fact that we won the contract, but it was actually what transpired and how we helped bring the feedback to the engineering team, help shape programs to figure out why the platform worked in the way it did and how we could actually do something to solve it. And so today we now have what is it, VMSS Flex, based like as a
Mm.
kind of transpired from all the work that we did as part of Jedi and the $10 billion contract, and all of the problems we found and all the work that went into improving the platform in the last 6 7 years was all kind of from that kind of pinnacle point. And now we have really fast VM deployment. We have VMSS that scales incredibly fast and like scales in and out really really fast. So it's like all from that kind of moment. And while like we didn't necessarily write the software for what is now all these features that are live, we brought the information, we showed them all the gaps in the
Mm.
system, we showed how the competitors work, we gave them the base data that they needed in order to fund all that stuff, and we worked and we validated all the steps through. So it was a huge highlight. But I have so many, like personally, I have so many fun things that I've done. Like as I say, getting to work on war game simulation, mind blown. Like when you're sitting here looking at like these guys who are developing the Unreal 3D engines, and you're learning about how game cycles work and ticks and how objects and state and all works, and then you're asked layering on top of AI on top of that, and your brain is just kind of going, oh crap, to like. I never thought, like, for example, like this is why I mentioned the electronic engineering at the very start, the satellite stuff, was that I never thought waveforms would come back into my life, because it all started with 5G, military applications, remote surgery over 5G, robotics is part of that with the remote robotics, commands, like all of these different things. And you're sitting there kind of going, you stand back and you kind of go, what the hell is happening to my life? This is amazing. I just don't understand. But so I have so many really nice, incredible highlights, from presenting to the Jedi stuff, to the friends I've made, to the people I've connected with, to standing in front of audience, to books. Just it's hard to pick one, but it's just been this, like the last 14 years have been a relatively good kind of high. The low
That's a good
light
highlight.
was the low light was being arrogant. I have to be able to do it. Like there was a time where I knew I was great. Like I knew I was great with what I did, and that was the problem. I knew I was great, and I wasn't humble about it. And I knew I was landing value and contract value, like actual tangible money in to the industry. And it got to my head, because like this is that you are still only a number at the end of the day to the business, and you're still an individual. And so if you go around with that type of arrogance and cockiness, you then become less valuable, because people don't want to engage you, and if you can't be
Mm.
engaged, and so forth. So it was a really hard lesson to learn. It took, and I didn't necessarily less I when it always happens around rewards. I got a bad reward, and I was like, hang on a second, what the hell happened here? And it was a real eye opener. Now, it still took me a year or two to kind of really learn from it.
Yeah,
Like, it wasn't just like, oh crap. Like, there was a little bit of resentment from it for a little while. But on a lot of retrospection from it, on a lot of kind of really thinking about what happened and why it happened. It was that I just stopped being humble. I stopped being, I tried to be a king of a castle when there was no such thing as a king needed, and it was a low light because it shouldn't have happened, and I probably could, like, I could have done it. You look back and you go, I could have done that. I could have handled that situation. I could have handled that year way better than I did, and I didn't. And so it was low light because, you know, not because of the reward, but because it was like, you're kind of like, that's not who I fundamentally believe I was as a person. And yet I ended up in that sequence anyway. But I think the last part then, what Jazz was just some advice. I mean, the hard part about Ireland, and it's less of a hard part, is that you just have to take the leap. You have to work in international cultures. It's not something it's really hard to, like, you can work for an international company, but you're still bound by kind of, usually companies, like, most Irish companies have entities here, but they're still bound by the kind of the corporate level in the different jurisdictions. And so take the chance. I like, it's the big thing is that it can only go wrong, and once it goes wrong, you can fix it. And it's
True.
it's just I know it sounds really simple and stupid, but like, I think most people don't take that necessary risk of, of just saying screw it. Like, what can actually happen? It goes wrong, great, I'll come back home. Most of us have, like, and I do great. No, most of us have some sort of support system behind us that can catch us. And even if we can't catch us, like, we're made of flesh, we bounce a little bit, so it's fine. We will recover, like, our bones repair, our skin heals, like it, and it's just one of those type of things of, don't be risk adverse. It's that, take the risk. Most risks are, you can be well educated on, so take the risk, see what happens, go try different kind of fields, and you know while the US is, it's not just the US. Like, there's huge markets out there. Go work in China, go work in Australia, go work in Taiwan, go work in India or Africa. All these emerging insane communities of incredible technical specialists, software engineers, whatever you want to call, whatever, just incredible people. It exists. So just go get a different sample on life, and then come back, and you will see a much broader and more interesting picture, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's good advice, mate. One thing I've started doing on these is, if I do know the person I'm interviewing, I tell my favorite story. So I will tell everyone who's still watching at this point. I don't know if anyone will be, but who knows? Maybe our families will. My favorite memory of you is when you did come to Australia, and we were. What were we doing? I'm trying to remember. We did Train the Trainer for Orchestrator, of all things. Oh, Orchestrator. That was an interesting product, in Sydney. And there's John and I. It was a freezing day. I think it was winter in Sydney. And I'm sitting there chilling, getting really cold. And you were, you're wearing pants, but you had a shirt on and nothing else. And I was like, man, it's cold. Aren't you cold? And, you were like, I don't know, we're 2 or 3 pints in. And you're like, this isn't cold. And you're just walking away like there's nothing, absolutely nothing. And I was like, okay, fair enough. The dude from Ireland is telling me it's not cold, and it probably is not even that cold here. So, yeah, it was a good memory. It was a funny memory.
I remember that because do you know what? It was when I had come to Melbourne the first week,
Yeah.
and we met up. The manager at the time had a lunch for the team, and everyone was wearing big kind of duffel coats and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And it's like 17 degrees Celsius outside, and like, as an Irish person, I'm sweating, and you guys are all, but and I was standing there kind of going, oh, maybe I should just put a coat on just to fit in here at this point. Yeah.
No,
It was
no.
so funny.
No. It's yeah, we're used to it. Like, the t-shirts come out. It depends if the sun's out. It can be 17 degrees in Melbourne. The sun will be out, and you're pretty good. But all good.
It was a good time. It was a good
It
time.
was a good time. All right, mate. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. So thank you very much for coming along, and for everyone else, we'll see you at the next one. See ya.
Cool. Thanks, George. Take care.
Thank you for watching this episode of Simpa Says. If you would like to see more videos, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Or follow if you are listening on a podcast platform to support the channel and join our community.